All right. Let me go back to sharing the screen. Back to the presentation. Okay. So Matt, Beatrice, and I were just getting acquainted and discussing Youth Build, our program.
Oh, okay. I live right around the corner from Youth Build here on, what is it, Park or um, so I walk by the Youth Build office there often, Beatrice.
All
Nice.
right. So we will speed through this material and just feel free to say stop if there's anything that you want us to slow down about. And then we can just get to the conversation because I think that will probably be most interesting slash helpful. Um, so sort of what we had planned to do was talk a little bit about who the Ability Challenge, who we are, and then talk a little bit about the process that led us to creating this series, and then share the series, and then just have a discussion about what's happening right now with planning, and what issues are most top of mind around accelerating instruction in diverse learners. Is there anything in particular that you were looking to learn about or hear about?
I think for me, it's just, finding the best way or just brainstorming on what that best way would be to support our set populations at school. Um, just there's a lot of, instructional loss that had happened throughout this year. So just trying to find the best way to support them.
Gotcha. All right. Well, hopefully, what we talk about will spur some thoughts, and then we can also always follow up afterwards. There's so all right. The Ability Challenge. This slide has a lot of text, but I'm going to just sort of talk through. I'm Sarah Sandelius, and I founded the Ability Challenge to work with schools on improving special education processes. And as we were discussing before, after having been in New York City in the alternative school district and then in the legal office, moving back to DC, which is where I'm from, I saw similar challenges across settings in terms of the challenges with implementing the regulation heavy pieces of special education and not having that time and effort translate into better services for kids because there is so much to do and so many efforts being put on compliance, and oftentimes, as we know, compliance doesn't always translate into classroom changes. So that was the lens with which we started the Ability Challenge, which I started the Ability Challenge. And where we are now is that we're really focused on collaboration across school teams and what are the highest leverage practices that lead to better results for students with disabilities and other diverse learners in classrooms. And so in doing that, we have sort of three components. We have a training that we run, or we have two trainings that we run. And then we do school partnerships around school improvement. So those are much more tailored to what the schools are looking to do. And then we have more we call ecosystem building, which is the consulting piece. And so as part of ecosystem building, we partnered with OSSI to run a community of practice over the last year around how do you support students with disabilities through continuous learning. And part of our task in doing that was to memorialize practices that are showing promise for young people. And so uh, and Matt obviously jump in here. I think, with everything that was constantly changing over the year, sort of pulling out the through lines and thinking about what sort of created some stability and continuity across all of the programs, was sort of where we landed with the community of practice. And so we did some talking about how do you manage change, and we did some talking about like OSSI has a new guidance document, let's dig into it. And through that, over the period of the year, we were also creating these asynchronous modules for folks who couldn't attend COP meetings. And so when it came to the end of those sessions, which is now, we said, you know, let's take what we've talked about and what we've learned and create these online modules that we can share with the rest of the city and really anyone who wants to take a look at them, on the things that we talked about, or the way in which some of those materials will help moving forward, right? So like we didn't really talk about accelerated learning until the end of our COP, but we framed some of the conversations that we had around specialized instruction in the context of accelerated learning, because that's most top of mind for folks now. So that's really where these things came from. Matt, anything else to add?
I think the only other thing to add is that what we really wanted to do was, in the midst of this really difficult year, to provide people with an opportunity to try and improve together, to form some relationships across schools, hopefully, and to build a process through which you know, they could take whatever they learned from having to go through distance learning or continuous education and preserve what worked and carry it forward. That was something else that we thought was valuable, that this was a really hard year and let's not just leave all the learning behind.
So we created 2 series, one on planning for accelerating learning, and the other one on managing special ed change. And we're sort of focusing on the series 1 today, and then we'll focus on series 2 on Thursday, unless we can get through all of it now and then free up your time on Thursday. I don't know if you're planning on attending or not, but we're flexible. We can do whatever is most helpful. So really in the first one, our goal is to really talk about what is specialized instruction, and most particularly focusing on what is the role of specialized instruction in accelerated learning, and how do you plan to keep diverse learners at the forefront of what you're doing when you're planning for next year. And so we'll walk through some of the strategies that we have, but that's really the goal of series 1. And then series 2 is much more focused on you know, managing change with the idea of like continuous improvement cycles, creating a continuous improvement team, and how do you do that in the context of special education. All right, so I'm going to just breeze through these, and then we can also flip through to the we can flip back and forth to the actual link if you want. But so we broke it down into 4 parts. And the first part is just sort of defining terms, right? What is specialized instruction? And then each of the parts has videos, and then it also has activities. And so the activities are things that you can either do on your own, or probably more interestingly, you could do them with a leadership team to walk through some of the planning process. And so, yeah, so the first piece is just understanding what it is, understanding what specialized instruction is, and then thinking about having a reflection process to think about like, where is your school doing this well, and where is your school need more support. All right, and then we have a little video. Would you like me to play it? All right, here we go. This is an example of what, let's see if it works, of what's there. Defining specialized instruction. Specially designed instruction is an entitlement granted by the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, and it is defined as the instruction provided to a student with a disability who has an individualized education program, or IEP, in order to help him or her master IEP goals and objectives. Think of these services as specific differentiation strategies planned to address one child's disability-related needs. The advantage is that by planning for and using specially designed instruction in inclusive classrooms, you can actually remove barriers and provide access to grade-level curriculum, more generally, for all of your students. Let's get a little more specific. The Council for Exceptional Children outlines 4 high-leverage practices for effective special ed teachers, which can be generalized to help us form a picture of specialized instruction. Practice 1 is collaboration. Educators collaborate with a range of professionals, caregivers, families, and others to assure that educational programs and related services are effectively designed and implemented to meet the needs of each student with a disability. This allows for varied expertise and perspectives about a student to be shared among those responsible for a student's learning and well-being. Collaborative educators focus on designing instructional programs and collecting data to monitor progress. The next practice is assessment. Assessment enables educators to fully understand students' strengths and needs. This includes formal standardized assessments, such as statewide exams or evaluations for identification, as well as informal assessments that help educators evaluate ongoing needs and design instruction. Assessments also help educators understand how context, culture, language, poverty, and other factors might influence student performance. Practice 3 is social, emotional, behavioral competency. Effective practices establish learning environments that support student success, such as increasing appropriate behavior through the explicit teaching of social skills and offering opportunities to practice appropriate social behaviors throughout the school day. Practice 4 is instruction. This is the biggest overlap with specialized instruction. This covers the use of strategic and flexible practices, combining content with pedagogical and data-driven approaches to design, deliver, and evaluate the effectiveness of instruction. Instruction maximizes academic learning time, actively engages learners in meaningful activities, and emphasizes proactive and positive approaches across tiers of instructional intensity. Another way to think about it is just like climbing a mountain. Most of the work and the planning happens at base camp. So what does happen before you start to climb? First, you have to survey the mountain. You have to know who you're traveling with, identify potential barriers, pick a path, assemble your tools, and then take a deep breath before you begin. The same thing happens when you plan for specialized instruction. Just like surveying the mountain, educators must define a learning goal. Knowing your travelers actually means gathering information about your students. Dig into the documents and data. Identifying barriers is the same, only with educational planning, you're looking at barriers to access to the curriculum. Pick an instructional path, and as with climbing, pick alternatives. Make sure to have a plan B and C, and maybe even D. Assemble the right tools, including universal supports, accommodations, and modifications. And finally, take a deep breath of reflection before you begin. All right, so that's that. they're not all little, cartoons, but basically the different modules in there, the different videos in there sort of go through different pieces of the work. Let's not watch it again.
Specialized instruction.
Okay, part two. So part two is around putting it all together, right? What does it look like when you have a million different things happening? You have to balance all of the different priorities and have the big bucket of accelerated learning sort of happening across all of those different things. And so the one thing that we stress or we pull from OSSI's materials is that in accelerated learning, what educators are doing is putting the unfinished learning in the context of new learning. So rather than going backwards, only like a sort of traditional remediation type of or remedial instruction type of approach, educators are integrating the new content with some of the missed skills. And obviously with that, also need high quality assessments to understand where students are and sort of content rich materials. Matt, do you want to run through the last ones?
Sure. Sorry, sure. So yeah, one of the things that you're going to have to do is to identify your specialized instruction priorities. And the starting point is to understand where your students are vis-a-vis the grade level content. So the first priority really is, as Sarah said, not going back and remediating prior grade level work, but starting where you are and then kind of looping back to the most important aspects of that work and having them work side by side in the instruction. So remediating small pieces that are critical to the new grade level content. And once you understand where your students are there, you can figure out whether or not you need a new IEP, right? In general, I think OSSI's position is that because everyone is going to need remediation this year after the pandemic, the default is not to just provide every student a new IEP, right? But there's still a process that we have to follow to make sure that we understand whether we do need one, right? The key takeaway is don't assume that every student needs a new IEP until you go through this process, right? So first, the first thing you need to know is if they're going to make progress against that grade level content, are they going to need different ongoing services or different goals? And if the answer to that is yes, you might need a new IEP. So a real world example might be if a student is going to get remediation or get the new grade level content, but in order to make up the services, you have to change a reading intervention, for example, and move them from an online version of something to a new, differently grouped, more intensive in-person intervention, you might need a new IEP, right? If you're going to have to make that change, or IEP amendment. But you should work with the family to determine which way you should go, right? So I think you would use the same logic you normally use to determine whether you need a new IEP or if you can just update it. Does that track? Okay. And then if you don't need to change the services or goals, if everything can still continue as it was, then you don't need to write a new IEP. You just need to plan the grade level content and the accelerated instruction in a way that comports with the IEP and meets the grade level content goals. All right. So here again, you want to start by finding the right research-based practices to accelerate the instruction. Are you going to use high dosage tutoring? Are you going to restructure the course to deliver some online and some in person? or to deliver everything in person now that they were trying to get online last year while in distance learning during the pandemic? Or might you try and implement some sort of competency-based instruction where students can demonstrate that they've learned something in a different way than they would have demonstrated it had there not been a pandemic? So, for example, if and Youth Build is probably a good example of this, that if they're going to do some sort of project to demonstrate that they've learned mathematical concepts and skills that are grade level appropriate, say geometry, through projects, in lieu of a test or paper and pencil test environment, or alongside a paper and pencil test as well to really demonstrate mastery. Those are some ways you could do this. I think it's important to note that we want to make sure that these three strategies are done in consultation with experts for a couple of reasons. One, families will feel better if you can explain to them why the strategies work according to the experts, right? Now, they don't just trust experts, but they certainly, hopefully, trust. No one should just trust an expert because they say, I'm an expert. But if you can show the research base and show that the way you're delivering the tutoring, for example, is going to achieve or is likely to achieve results that people are getting elsewhere, that's something that can be a confidence building measure for both you, your students, your families, and your teachers. So that's something I think would be important for you to realize. Another?
I'm curious about accelerated learning in the context of GED. Like, is there the same sort of push to accelerate, or are you guys sort of thinking about it in the same path that you have always been, which is like a progression towards the skills that you need to pass that test?
No, so it makes sense what you're talking about. So we're right now in the process of restructuring some of the courses. So we're trying to identify, more specific entry points and exit points for each of the cohorts based on their, academic readiness. So whether that is, we have a very ABE, like basic adult basic education, cohorts, and then we move into a more adult intermediate, adult basic education intermediate level until we move when they get to that secondary level, which puts them roughly at a ninth grade level. So we're working on that. We're adding also, we're partnering up. We purchased licenses from Achieve 3000, which is a reading based program. So we're trying to work really heavily on reading, given the fact that 3 out of 4 tests are reading based. So we're really like, these are really small improvements that we're making along the way and making sure that these, programs also provide the tools and accommodations needed, whether that is adjusting lexile levels in the reading or a specific tools that students can, universal tools that student can use. So we're in the process of doing that. And also we've been thinking about tutoring. And so this is great conversation. Yeah, making me think right now.
There's some links to, like, in terms of like the experts, what Matt was talking about, there are some links to the research in the tool, and then some other examples as well. So there are more ideas in there.
All right, so next, we want to make sure that we translate the priorities for specialized instruction into the student level outcomes, right? So, oh wait, Sarah, this looks the same.
Yeah, this slide, you can just talk it through here, because I think that slide didn't make a lot of sense.
All right, okay, so here, this tool is to help you plan individual student recovery, right? You'll see that there's an area, the blue boxes, and here it just has ELA and math, but obviously you could use this for any subject area. You want to know what the present levels of performance are, the results and the student and family input. And then what you would do is decide, okay, what is the level of intervention we need? Do we need high intensity? Do we need, you know, low intensity? And that might lead you to a description of the intervention. So a low intensity intervention might just be sort of a standard within the normal data cycle reteach to ensure that the student is getting it. Or it could be, you know, you could say, all right, we're going to pre-teach to our students with disabilities, and then they will participate in a small group, and then they'll just get general instruction, and we'll see if that works, right? And then the intended outcome would just be to make sure that they can access the grade level content, and ultimately, but also that they can access the content that they're trying to recover, right? And then for your implementation, what's the length of the trial? We're going to go for a week with this one strategy on this one topic area. We're going to collect some data to make sure it worked, and then we'll just plan for collaboration. And on this one, what's really important from our perspective is that, you know, recovery is going to mean a lot of different things, but there's going to be a social, emotional, behavioral aspect, as well as there's going to be a single sort of subject area, content area need for recovery, and then there are going to be cross content area needs for recovery. So reading for information, for example, you might collaborate between the science teacher, a specials teacher, perhaps if an art teacher or a PE teacher or music teacher is having students read for information, or if a student is exhibiting higher levels of frustration than, say, when they went out from before the pandemic to now, maybe somebody who's doing behavioral health services with the student is helping them monitor their frustration tolerance. So you would say, all right, we want to talk to the art teacher, we want to talk to the reading specialist, the general ed teacher, and the social worker. So you could put that in that plan for collaboration. So any or all of those people could show mastery of a skill, could, you know, could collect data that would show that the student mastered a skill. Are there any questions about this, how you might use this tool?
So the tool is linked on the website, and you can, it's a Google Doc, so you can create a new one and like update it and change it and make it your own. And it really could work for students, any student, right? It doesn't necessarily, there's nothing in here that's like, let's talk about the IEP. At the end of it, this is a couple pages, and at the end it does ask some questions about the IEP, like, can you implement the IEP as it is written given this plan? But those are mostly just to show that like you could have an entire recovery plan for a student and the IEP would remain the same, right? And then in addition to this tool, there's also a school-wide planning tool that looks at like, all right, if we're going to map all of the different content areas that we need and which, and the interventions and the benchmark assessments, it just sort of puts it all in a chart form so that you can use it to plan where you and see where you have like missing pieces that you need to fill in. I think we'll skip. Should we skip straight to the video? Stop. Planning for an they like to start right away. Should we just go right to the tool?
I think so. All right, Sarah, do you want to?
Okay, so this is the website, and you'll see that there's this, and this will show you both. So it has both of the series right here. And it has just a brief overview of what the goals are. And then within each of these, this is sort of the meat, the content. What you do is you can click in and it shows the videos. And then it has the activities. And so with each activity, it has either a note catcher or it has additional resources to look at. This one happens to link to an Ability Challenge blog. It also, like when we were talking about the different types of, like here's all the research around the different types of accelerated learning instruction. Here are some different resources for planning. Like it's like lots and lots of links about screeners or links about different kinds of interventions. So what we were trying to do was, we know that there's like a lot of content out there. So what we were trying to do was cull through some of it and give you guys some of the more helpful strategies and tools. And then you'll see this is the school-wide version of that same planning tool. And so you can, take that and use that to help plan if it's helpful. And then we have an activity about communicating with families. And so you can either like do the activities as we've written them, or you can take the resources and, plan on your own. And then down here we have just like, if you prefer, you don't want to listen to Matt and I talk, then you can just download the slides and use the tools, and skip the commentary. So that's really that. Those are the resources. And the same thing goes for the second one. It's just the topics obviously are different.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is the first set of modules is for within a classroom, or the first set is for within a classroom, and then the second one is across classrooms, right? How are we guiding it across our school or our grade level teams versus what are we doing in a specific classroom? So I think they're both, they both offer some good tools and good approaches, and which one is more applicable to you will just depend on your specific school context. And maybe they're equally useful, which would be great for us.
So when you see this, like, do you have any thoughts about how you might use some of it? I mean, I know we just sort of like did the big dump. Here it all is. Is anything sticking out to you? Or is there anything missing, I guess, is the other question. And feel free to just pass, even though you're the only one that I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. Am I the only one?
Yeah. We've got some folks that are there listening.
So I think this is very helpful. I think that one of the things that I will do next, right, as my next step is to go through each of the modules. I'll look at the videos and I'll try to either, just select the specific things that based on what I know, our SPED program at school, things that would help us, right? But this also gave me the idea of how can I also use this for gen ed classrooms, right? And so I'm now thinking, what are some of those specific questions that, I can, and information and resources that I can also use for general education. So I think this is great. I really hope I can make it to the Thursday session. I have a long day with meetings, but I'll try my best. If not, I'll take a look at the modules.
Great. And we'll record it too, so you can also watch our version of this one.
I think trying to figure out how you can use it in general ed is a great idea. As Sarah mentioned, the tools are not special education specific, so that could be very helpful. And hopefully the webinars and just being able to access this, you can share it with your faculty so that you don't have to interpret our work. That game of telephone doesn't always work well for people in your position, right? And so the videos and the recorded webinars might help you either deliver those messages, or you can just say, hey, watch these videos and it'll explain the tool, or it'll explain the concepts to your faculty. So we tried very hard to make light work for you. Yes. Was that?
Hi. This is Olivia Smith. That was actually my question, just in terms of accessing the recording of this session. I have a couple of people I wanted to participate, but they were not able to. Um, are you going to send it directly to us as participants, or if you could show us the line of how to find it within your website, that would be great.
We can send what's easiest. Do you want us to send you a link with it?
That would be fabulous.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The other thing is that we really were very intentional about trying to make it so that you didn't have to go through you don't have to sit down and like go through an hour and a half of everything at once, right? So you can sort of click through when you have a few minutes, and then figure out what's going to work for you. Because we know that it's rare to have an hour and a half to sit and think about recovery. Although most people probably would like to have that as free hour and a half.
I had a question. This information is extremely helpful, especially in trying to fill out and do the CEP. So I had a question a little bit more specifically to the CEP, and maybe where in the information I can find this answer. But it talks about, there's a question just saying kind of how will your school ensure that students will not be in a more a least restrictive environment. And though I can see it in my head, I just need to know, like, is there a specific language that needs to be for that particular question?
Good question.
Madra, if I'm hearing you right, I think the answer is no, that they're not looking for specific language, or they're not looking for you to sort of guess a right answer on how you're going to do that. I think another way to think about that question is, for your purposes, is when you build your recovery plans, how can you ensure that you're not increasing the segregation of students with disabilities from their non-disabled peers in the delivery of recovery? And practically speaking, some options that might work for that are using consultation models with the general educator delivering some of the recovery in the gen ed setting, making sure that you push in recovery services as opposed to pulling students out whenever you can. Our students with disabilities are going to have some of the same recovery needs as students without them, and we all know that. So let's push that in wherever possible. And then to just think about the LRE number in the same way you typically do, right? Like, how do we make sure that this number always goes up and never goes down? Like the amount of time they spend in general ed setting. Obviously there are exceptions to that, but you want to constantly be thinking, if I deliver this outside now, can I get them inside later? Or can I do this inside the gen ed setting now?
But I also think that
I definitely think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just like hearing what you were saying, some of those suggestions as far as like push it in, have the gen ed teacher provide some of the services. And I guess my knee-jerk reaction is that's what we always do. And then additionally, but kind of like you said, so many students are going to be on recovery plans or accelerated learning plans, just as, all the students will be. So, a lot of those services will be provided. Recovery will be happening in the classroom. So just didn't know if there was just something specific, but it sounds like just kind of making sure, it's a question to make you more, just be conscious of it, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to add two things. One is that I think you could just put, like, I actually think the language could be, don't quote me on this one, even though we're recording and putting this everywhere. Like to actually review a child's IEP as part of the recovery planning process to make sure that you aren't putting them in a more restrictive setting. Like, I think if you put that in the CEP, like that could be a reinforcer and then actually doing it, right? Without actually getting super specific about location of services. But I also think it doesn't exclude you from doing one-on-one if the one-on-one is what's needed and if the one-on-one is what's being offered to all students, right? And
And,
so,
and
yeah,
I think that's where my mind went first. One-on-ones, high dosage tutoring is going to be provided to everyone. It's not specific to, students with IEPs. So yes, they may get more small group instruction, but everyone is. So, that's kind of where I was thinking when I asked the question.
Yeah. I think then you could just say that it's in the general ed setting, right? High dosage tutoring is happening in the general ed setting.
but Matt, what do you think about like if they wanted to connect a student to their particular special ed teacher who's already doing some of the reading work
Mhm.
as a high dosage tutor? I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but that also wouldn't hit up against LRE, would it?
I don't think so, because I think it would be specialized instruction in the gen ed setting. Like, if we think of tutoring it's not a great analogy, but if we think of tutoring as a class or a class time, so if students are doing a mix of online and in-person high dosage tutoring in, let's just say in the cafeteria, on laptops or at tables after school, that would be the gen ed setting for this program. And then you could push in either remotely or in person that special educator to that setting. And we should bring this example up with OSSI and update folks if we're getting any of this wrong. But to me, I think this is probably mostly right.
Because along that
exceptions.
that line, I'm the special ed teacher. I believe I'll be providing interventions here and there. And just because a student with the IEP is now in my pull-out group of 5, I don't feel like, okay, they're now getting more specialized instruction. It's provided to everyone that needs it. They're just in the group.
And I think also it's about thinking through. I mean, I think it's about thinking through this kind of calculation and figuring out like, is there a way to do this in a less restrictive environment? If not, if this is the best way to do it, and potentially there's a gen ed kid in that group, right? Like, then I think as long as you can sort of back up the decisions that you're making, that's what OSSI is really looking to see in that answer, especially is to make sure that you're actually thinking about this and not just saying like all my special ed kids are going to go work on a computer
Right.
and X.
Right. There's not going to be a special ed high dosage tutoring room and a gen ed high dosage tutoring room, right? I think Sarah's exactly right. Another way to phrase it might be, do I really need to deliver this recovery service outside the general ed setting? You should, using the language of IDEA, where the default setting is a gen ed classroom, you should exhaust every opportunity to have your students in the gen ed setting. And then when that's not working, then maybe you do have a few students who you do pull out to a special ed only recovery room, but just for a very specific set of recovery needs.
Any other questions or thoughts coming out of this? Madra, you know how to reach us. We're here if you need any other support. Olivia, if you have thoughts or questions afterwards, or if you share this with colleagues, and you have other questions, we're here. We're happy to engage, and we'll send you some contact information when we send the resource. Because we really, this is, we really would like to be able to be a resource and have this material be helpful. And so if there's, something missing or something else that you're looking for, we're happy to see what we can do to help.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.